So it kind of speaks for itself. Like you look at the kitchen. I don't know what plans you guys have if you're going to go through and kind of just start fresh, or going to kind of move in right away. But if you move in right away, you'll probably find little drips underneath the sink. The water shut off to it, and a lot of times that's because these old units leak a little bit. The older they get, the more likely the seal under there is going to fail. So it's kind of outdated. The fridge works, but these fridges are energy hogs. They'll suck up a lot of electricity compared to a new unit, quite a bit more. So the fan, I don't know if there's a switch for it. Even if it does turn on, it's totally gooped up with oils and fats and stuff, which is really, really typical. It's usually what we find with those older wall-mounted units. So the other thing too with the older homes, this vintage is just single pane windows that are painted shut. That's almost always the case. Is that usually I would say a big bulk of them will be painted shut, or the sash cords will be broken or missing. Like this one's missing the cords here. Should have these little cords on the ends there, and then they're just draftier. So usually what you'll find is that, especially with oil heat, you'll turn on the furnace. You can come back from work, for instance, and then maybe crank the furnace up, and the house will heat up really quickly. But as soon as the furnace kicks off or turns off, then the heat tends to dissipate pretty quickly as well. So it's preferred to have double pane windows installed. They've done that a while ago upstairs, so they have the aluminum framed windows, and so those are going to be drafty as well, even though they're double pane. They're an older version of that, and the aluminum framing itself tends to suck up quite a bit of the heat. So those are things that generally get updated, just like the wiring. Generally, they get updated at some point, and so a lot of these old homes will have some of that wiring left, or a lot of it left, and then a lot of them have also been updated too. So there's a lot of personal preference there on how important it is for you to have fully grounded modern wiring versus if you're comfortable having the older ungrounded wiring. And then with windows, how important it is for you to keep the heat in the house. If you leave it the way it is, you're going to be paying more for heat, and the comfort level is going to be a little bit lower. So those are some of the things that just kind of jumped out, and you've probably noticed them already as you kind of walk through the house. But
now with the wiring, what's the comfort level, like fires or?
Right, yeah, that's the big concern really. Fire and of course shock are the two things that the two safety items that come up. And then convenience too. If you leave original ungrounded wiring, you can leave them so that they look like that outlet does there with double prong only, with no grounding on it. That's perfectly safe because you can't plug in something that needs a ground for safety. So it's safe to use as it is, but from the convenience side of that, it makes it kind of tricky to, you end up with a computer and you're like, where do I plug this in? And everything's safe to use, but I don't have anything to plug into. So, and then some of these are three-prong ungrounded, which is also really common. This is something we find almost on a daily basis. Here's an example of a three-prong that looks like it's grounded, but it's essentially no different than the two-prong over there. This bottom ground lug there is not actually connected to anything, so it could be deceiving. So most of the wiring through the house is older knob and tube wiring. And just like any older home with knob and tube wiring, if there's wiring in the attic, which is usually how they wire the house, is have the wiring kind of branch out through the attic, and the attic's insulated, it's almost always covering up the knob and tube, which it should. So it's something we see all the time. It's not supposed to cover it up, and it is. The downside to that is that the idea is that the wiring can overheat, and then it can be a fire concern. There is one splice that I noticed up there, and if you were to remove all the insulation, you may find that there's more splicing, and the splicing is what I'm referring to is like homeowner kind of, they take a new wire and they wrap it around the old wiring and just use electrical tape and just kind of leave it at that. So we have a little bit of kind of both of those going on. We have covered knob and tube wiring, it's covered in the insulation, it's spliced at least in one spot. It definitely gets a lot worse than that though. I mean, there's a lot of houses that we do where it's just ready for an electrician to go through for safety. I push that a lot more. So, but yeah, I don't want to. It would be very prudent to have an electrician go up there and kind of at least kind of repair those splices and make sure that they're done properly for safety. And maybe they might find a couple more if they push some of that insulation back. But the correct thing, the absolute correct thing to do is to remove the insulation, ideally rewire and then re-insulate, and then you know that you're protected, so you don't have to worry about that. So that's what we have with wiring. And stop me too if you have any questions.
Yeah.
The plumbing looks like they've upgraded most of the piping. I think there's probably gonna still be a little bit of galvanized pipe, original galvanized pipe feeding the bathroom upstairs, because the water flow kind of fluctuates a little bit up there. But most of the wiring that's visible in the house is gonna be copper, upgraded copper. And then the supply pipe that goes from the meter to the house, that feeds the house with cold water, that's gonna be galvanized, which is pretty typical. Eventually that'll need to be replaced too, so.
So what's the issue with galvanized then?
It plugs up with rust, and then it just, the inside diameter just gets rusty and plugged up, and then the water flow gets restricted. And eventually they can break and cause leaks and issues there. There's a little bit of leaking too up in the master bathroom. I'll show you where that's at when we get up there. But yeah, that's kind of wiring, plumbing. Of course, the interiors are kind of stained, water stained, and kind of torn up a little bit. But the reason we're seeing all these water stains around windows, there's more stain underneath the window over there. It looks to me is because they have the original siding that was leaking, and then since then they've put another layer of vinyl siding over the top of that, and usually that leaves you just with the interior stains, water stains. I don't see anything that looks active, but it can be hard to tell since it hasn't been raining. So we're keeping an eye on it. There's no moisture, no signs of active moisture popping up there.
Were you able to see what was underneath the vinyl, or?
It looks like wood, yeah, a little bit. You can see around the bottom parts there.
At the back door, you can pull it out enough to see it's clapboard, not
Okay.
shingle.
Yeah.
Cool.
It's reassuring to see that because some of these have little asbestos siding, so if you ever remove all of the siding, it can be more expensive to do that. Some of these older homes too, they will have had texture, asbestos texture, so they like popcorn ceilings that you see in 70s houses. There was an era where they coated the exterior with very similar material, so sometimes that can be expensive to remediate if it's there. But I didn't see any signs, but of course you never know what the entire condition is until you pull the siding out. But it's good to see that there's no signs of it. The fireplace and the chimney look pretty good. The mortar's a little worn on the outside. I'll show you when we get up there. The damper opens and closes pretty well. There's still some gaps around there, so it's not perfect, but it is an older home, so it kind of fits into what we would expect for that. The damper is otherwise functional. The floors are actually really nice and straight for the age of the home. The foundation, I didn't see any significant cracks in the foundation, so it's holding up nicely. Usually we'll see a little bit more slopiness and cracks and things like that, so it's holding up really well. You take a look at that.